Hey everybody, welcome back to the LuckyDog podcast. This is your host, Elias Roush. This podcast is sponsored by EliasRoushMedia.com, photo, video, digital media production. Today we are discussing the Netflix documentary series, limited series, Tiger King 2020. Roughly 5 hours, 17 minutes total, featuring a guy named Joe Exotic. Now, if any of this just sounds crazy enough on its face, Joe Exotic, this big cat enthusiast, I would definitely go check it out. There's a little bit of murder mystery. There's some very interesting characters, animal rights heavily involved in it. It's a big amalgamation. So that's the short summary of it. If documentary, crime, true docs, that kind of thing is your speed, then definitely check this out and come back to this review because I kind of want you to go in there as cold as possible. So, I've only seen the first episode of Tiger King. This is about a big rivalry between big cat eccentrics take a dark turn when Joe Exotic, a controversial animal park boss, is caught in a murder for hire plot. On this first episode, I'm just going to kind of run through this first episode of Tiger King real quick and what you're going to learn. I'm going to give you just some key facts about what I observed about this first episode, but overall, I'm going to say I'm hooked. We've got some fascinating characters. We've got a lot of interesting shots with this documentary. I'm always worried about when watching a documentary that there's not enough shots or footage of whatever the topic is. There's plenty of footage, at least in this first episode. It's not like 210 drone shots like the Michael Jackson documentary, or it's not a ton of reenactments like some of these other true crime docs or something like that. There's a lot of relevant recent footage. The editing from this, from a technical standpoint, I thought was pretty well done. This first episode is directed by, let me see, Rebecca Chaikin and Eric Goody. They're known for Racing Extinction, 60 Minutes. Let me see. This is all. He's got a Eric Good has. Sorry. Eric Good has only directed Tiger King, but he's also known for being in Race Extinction, and he's been in 60 Minutes. We also have Rebecca Shacklin. Is that her name? I don't know. I'm sorry if I was mispronouncing that. She is also known for all of Tiger King, but also she's been a director on Another World, Lockdown USA, Last Party, 2000, which I believe all of those are documentaries. Lockdown was on War on Drugs. Last Party is about the 2000 presidential election. And Another World, what was that about? What would drive someone to drop everyone and move to the city of a lower Manhattan, fall into greedy. So it's about corporate greed and overlord, Occupy Wall Street. That's what Another World is. So that's what these directors are coming from real quick. So back to the story. Tiger fucking King. This first episode, you meet Joe Exotic, the gun-toting operator of an Oklahoma big cat park. He's been accused of hiring someone to kill his chief rival, Carol Baskin. So this episode did an excellent job at ingraining us within what this world is going to be. We are introduced to Joe Exotic. We find out a big chunk of his backstory. We find out his pride, his joy, the tigers, why he's somewhat, quote unquote, obsessed with the tigers and likes being around the tigers. We also find out that there are other, quote unquote, big game enthusiasts and they focus on some of the animal rights issues with regards of owning some of these massive animals, specifically the tigers. Now, that's when we were introduced to Carol Baskin. She is, I guess, owner or founder of Big Cat Rescue. And so the thing about this documentary is we have not one, but two very interesting individuals within the first 30 minutes. And they are extremely at odds. You understand their motivations and where they come from. It's shown in a very cinematic way. I love watching these beautiful animals. So you get two sides of the spectrum. You get the animal lover, but there's also the animal rights activist. And so both of them are kind of juggling with how do you determine to you don't want to commercialize the animals, but you need to make money in a way. And so, owning these animals is obviously expensive as fuck, and they go into real depth and detail about how some of the animals are kept. And so that actually brings another big game enthusiast, called, his name's Doc Antle, I think his name is. It's this guy in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, which I was thinking, oh shit, have I been to this thing or something like that? Because I've been to Myrtle Beach and South Carolina quite a lot when I was younger, before it got way too ratchet and whatnot. But I was like, whoa, this guy's actually kind of close. So we were introduced to not one, not two, but three really interesting characters within, the first 45 minutes. One being Joe Exotic, two being Doc Antle, three being Carol Baskin. Each one of these characters are extremely rich with, I don't want to say charisma, but they're very eccentric, and they're different in how they are approaching taking care of these wild animals. And so I think from all perspectives of this documentary, this first episode is wonderful. Let me see what else we got to talk about. Anything else? Yeah, the editing, like I said, the editing in the first in the first episode of the documentary has been pretty good. Juggling the difference of it's kind of comparing and contrasting how each one of them behave around these animals and how they are reflected in real life. So, they show like Big Doc. They show Joe Exotic, and he seems to be the one that he just loves the animals, and he's kind of the more hands-on approach, I guess. Carol Baskin, it's kind of hard to tell how she mingles with the cats a little bit, but she seems to be much more of a let them kind of do their own thing. You don't need to have them exposed, in the same way that Joe Exotic and Big Doc are doing. But then we have Big Doc on the other side of the spectrum, and Big Doc is kind of like the big shit on the street. He's probably pulling in the most amount of money, using the animals for the most amount of commercialism. And each one of them are talking about, don't commercialize the animals, don't use them to make money, don't use them to do all that, don't exploit the animals. And I gotta say that they all feel like somewhat hypocrites in a way. It's like, but I totally understand of needing to, if you're gonna own these animals, you're gonna have to fucking make money somehow. I mean, we get some of the figures and the numbers in here. The facts that we find out in this first episode are pretty fascinating. I think what they said is we have more tigers cooped up in America in cages or in zoos than there are tigers in the entire world. Is that true? I have not gone and done any research on this, but the facts that they were talking about, like Joe Exotic and his way of in feeding animals annually versus Doc Antle, the big guy, feeding his tigers $10,000, I think he said, a year for food per animal. And I think Joe Exotic said he's down to 3. And it definitely seems like there's this counterbalance. Like Joe seems like the underdog. Doc seems like the big guy on the street making the most money, and Carol is the one kind of in the middle, because she's trying to point the finger at the other two people, saying, you're exploiting the animals, you're profiting off of them, and there's these terrible things that are going to happen. And so by owning these animals, but yet it looks like that's exactly what she's going to do. So I'm kind of I don't know what to exactly think about this first episode, besides the fact that it's extremely interesting. They have an amazing plot line. The story is what's hooking me, along with these fascinating characters. The story is relevant. It fast forwards us all the way up to Joe being in his own sort of cage, and which is kind of ironic, honestly. But we don't exactly know what are the events that led Joe up to being put in jail, and I don't think we know how long he's going to be in there. If he's completely slam shut, booked. Is he in jail for the entire spectrum? For the rest of his life. I don't know. I got to watch the rest of the season. Let me see anything else that I wanted to discuss regarding Joe Exotic. I really didn't have too many cons about this. I was pleasantly surprised. The hour flew by. Interesting ass characters. Pretty dope. Sorry, dope. It's a pretty intriguing premise, and it just seems like it's going to be a nice little mini series. Now, predictions. Do we want to do predictions for a documentary that technically we could just look up? But I don't know. Maybe. My prediction is this guy, after Joe Exotic is shown to have some sort of aggression against Carol. Not just Carol. It's against anybody that is trying to take away his livelihood or his tigers, because he considers them what seems like family. So, I don't think it's strictly personal with Carol. It doesn't seem like he just hates women or something like that. I don't get that feeling from the first hour of watching him. But it does seem that he has a big gripe against somebody, even threatening to take his tigers. And so it's, I think he says something like it's going to be another Waco out here. And Waco, they show past clips. I think 20 plus people were involved in gun shoots, half dead or something. Something crazy out there. Oh shit, something crazy out there. I'm pretty fascinated by the majority of this. This character Joe Exotic is definitely going to be one for the books. I'm curious which way we're going to land on this character. Are we going to land with maybe he did it, maybe he didn't? Them showing him shooting dummies and shooting the water out does not really bode well for him, and buying 300 rounds of buying 300 rounds and then talking about explosives and then intercutting it with, Carol not feeling safe. There's definitely this level of the director wants us to make it kind of look like maybe Joe is a little bit on edge. But I think that overall we're going to find out this guy's... if he did... I don't know. It's hard to tell. I really don't know at this point. He seems crazy enough that he might do it, but he also doesn't seem like he would ever do something that would take him away from his tigers intentionally. So I don't know. I'm very much on split decision on this one. But thank you all for listening to the Tiger King podcast. This is episode 1. We're probably not going to go through all of the episode, because this is probably going to be really easy to just binge. I think that one thing to note about these two guys, the big game guys, the big cat guys, even Carol maybe a little bit, they're all paranoid. Maybe don't put yourself in this situation where if you think you got to sleep with a gun underneath your pillow. It just seems kind of extreme. And if you think you're in danger, I'm not sure if you would want to get a Netflix documentary. I don't know how much danger you think you're going to be in if that's going to be happening. Now we all know I don't know. But anyways, thank you for listening to LuckyDog Podcast, episode 1 of Tiger King. Check out all the other LuckyDog podcasts. We'll probably do a roundup of this entire series, a season wrap up, and we'll talk about the craziness that this has to offer. I'm really excited about finishing this up. Check out the Aftercast. We just recorded Aftercast number 7. Aftercast is the behind the scenes of the LuckyDog podcast. We talk about non-movie related things. My grandfather, my 97-year-old grandfather, joined me for the Aftercast number 7, and I wanted to ask him in a quick 20-minute conversation, has the world ever just stopped like it has in the last 2 to 3 weeks and more or less a month for some people around the world? How in 97 years I was asking my grandfather, have you ever experienced anything like that? And so check out Aftercast number 7 coming down the tube. I think that's a really interesting listen if you want to hear a little, slight history buff and learn a little bit about, me and my family, as well as my grandfather and his experience of 97 years. He's seen a lot of shit. I was like, did this stop for the wars? And he's like, hell no. So I was like, wow, this is extremely unprecedented, and last century it basically has never happened like this. So check out Aftercast number 7. We still I talked about COVID-19 a little bit more in depth on the Contagion podcast. I just released the movie review for that, and also did a retro review for Outbreak 1995, kind of comparing and contrasting the action flick of 95 to the Contagion, quote unquote docu-style virus movie in Contagion. So check those two out, and come on back for Tiger King, the season finale review. Thank you for listening. PayPal.me/the LuckyDog Podcast. If you have any extra change, it would absolutely help us at the studio keep the lights on. If you are watching it, you can currently see that it's kind of stuffy in here. We might need a buck or two to kind of push the wall back or something like that. But the cash flow helps keep the lights on, especially in this relatively difficult time. If you are in a tough spot and your business is actually hurting during this quote unquote pandemic, you let me know. I want to add a couple of small businesses as advertisements on the podcast for a week or two, just to kind of give y'all some exposure and maybe help bring some business to your site. But thank you for listening, watching LuckyDog Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube for all the videos and podcasts early. I drop everything there early, and generally drop the regular podcast on Tuesdays. So check those out. Thank you for listening to the LuckyDog Podcast. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you, and take it easy.